Today I'm going to talk to you about didactical reduction versus references in teaching LaTeX, and the subtitle is How to Better Teach LaTeX. My name is Sarah Lang. I'm a digital humanities scholar at the University of Graz. Currently I'm a fellow at the Institut für Europäische Geschichte in Mainz. You might know me from my blog, the LaTeX Ninja, which I run since 2018, and where I, try to post tutorials. I post on the digital humanities, and I also sometimes post on how we can teach better. So this is a topic that's close to my heart, and I hope maybe I have some ideas that you might not be familiar with yet. This paper discusses how teaching concepts like didactical reduction, that means the art of reducing unnecessary detail, and common modes of knowledge transmission, like, for example, references and documentation are very common modes of knowledge transmission in the tech LaTeX community, how those two things can be reconciled. And it's going to be a difficult process because didactical reduction means leaving out detail, but references and documentation mean that every single detail is included, which is, probably the common way for technical people to think. Yet it's really detrimental for newbies and for teaching. So I want to share some suggestions how I think we could reconcile those things. Another problem is that the informal knowledge of how to act in a learning setting and how to procure knowledge often is linked to different forms of privilege. That means, was I told as a child or as a young adult how to properly use a search engine? How can I find something that I need? How do I behave on the internet so that people are not likely to reject me or humiliate me right away? And it's probably for lots of people, especially those who have that, let's call it technical privilege. People talk about male privilege or white privilege, especially lately white privilege has been a big subject. And I want to argue that there is also a thing like tech privilege. Some people have it and some don't, and those who have it can't see it. Using references to acquire knowledge actually requires a relatively big amount of previous knowledge that someone who doesn't have this technical privilege might not yet have, meaning that references are inaccessible or relatively inaccessible to those people who aren't yet in the know, who aren't yet in the community. This is why we need resources which use didactical reduction so that they can focus on the new things that they need to learn, the new concepts, and they can look past extraneous detail. People with non-tech backgrounds often lack this tacit knowledge to look past the extraneous detail into situations, to know what you're looking for in a reference. And if the reference has like 80 pages and you just have 10 minutes to solve your problem, people are probably not going to bother, and this is where, the tech LaTeX community loses new users, I guess. We have great new resources with Overleaf, for example, and they have this great teaching platform with lots of tutorials. But even there, I sometimes feel that the focus is still very reference-like. So it's like colors. How can I use colors? How can I use spacing? Whereas an approach focusing on didactical reduction tailored to noobs would be, how can I solve the problem that I have? Because often the noob might not even know, my problem is spacing. They just know, okay, I want the page to look like this or like that. It should look like I know it from Microsoft Word. And so it should be much more process driven if we want to be able to help people without the technical background. Because already knowing that you're looking for spacing or page layout, that's already a form of knowledge, which obviously people with the tech knowledge and the tech privilege don't see, but it's already actually a form of abstraction that a normal user who has never looked into tech stuff, a user who has probably ever only used Microsoft Word and graphical user interface programs and programs which really guide you very much through what you're doing, and you don't need to be very empowered yourself, they are going to have a problem with this sort of abstraction. This is the typical situation where people are like, the computer's not doing what I want, because that's what they were told. They were told that the computer is supposed to do tasks for them. We, of course, know that this is not how computers work. But already this understanding is something that needs to be taught. And I want to use some concepts from personal development, such as Tim Ferriss's minimum effective dose, for example, to help us solve these problems. This paper proposes ways of providing different sorts of tech-LaTeX education to different types of learners, and also, using the efforts made in my Ninja blog as an example. Okay, I said that I wanted to help solve these problems using concepts from personal development, and I mentioned Tim Ferriss's minimum effective dose. So let's just talk about this. What does the minimum effective dose, often abbreviated as MED, what does it mean? Well, he explains in his book, The 4-Hour Chef, that there are two things which hinder newbies from starting something, essentially. He doesn't call them newbies, but he talks about skill acquisition and expertise, but it's essentially what we have been talking about as the newbie. He says that there are failure points and there's a margin of safety. The failure points are, well, for example, I have to set up LaTeX on a Windows computer. I always use this example, but I think it's a good one for LaTeX. This can be so much of a hassle. If I don't have anyone who helps me, I might already fail at this point. I might not be able to install the packages, things go wrong. So if you follow this principle of the minimum effective dose, a suggestion could be, well, don't install Windows when you're starting. That's actually a good, that would be a good thing. No, don't install LaTeX on your Windows machine. If you're just trying LaTeX out, then just use platforms like Overleaf, which is a really cool platform anyway. And that way you already avoid this first failure point, and then only install it on your local machine if you really need it, if you're really going to go on, and if the new user is already hooked to LaTeX and they don't want to stop anymore, they don't want to quit. A second thing that he mentions is the margin of safety, and that's the question, basically, how badly can I do and still achieve really good results or above than normal results? And the above the normal quality is really related to standards. That doesn't mean I need to be the best in the world or my document needs to be the prettiest document, but basically a document that some non-typography aware person creates in Word when they're not paying attention versus a document where someone is not really paying attention to anything in LaTeX. They're just using the basic features, they don't really have any knowledge, and how badly can I do and still achieve outstanding results? And there it becomes pretty obvious that typography-wise, if a user just uses Word and they don't pay any attention at all, versus they just use LaTeX and don't pay attention at all as long as it still compiles and everything still works, the result is going to be outstanding. So essentially, you don't need lots of LaTeX finesse. Just the fact of using a superior typesetting system is going to give you these outstanding results. And I think this is what we should focus on, not try and teach people the really complicated stuff, but focus on the fact that already just the fact that they're using the absolute basics already gives them a 100% better result. I once wrote this blog post about didactical reduction. I actually wrote two of them, part 1 and part 2. And in part 1, I had this subheading, and it said, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." And I think this is essentially, well, the main reason that many things go wrong in teaching. We have these good intentions, we aim a little bit too high, and we don't actually have good results. Because we aim too high, because it was too difficult for our students. So, a problem with didactical reduction is that either you're not doing it at all, or you're doing it in a way that topics get reduced to banalities, and they lose their content, basically, by didactically reducing them. What I mean by didactical reduction is that we need to go to a point where the basics are explained in a way that, they're not dumbing the recipient down, or they're not assuming that the reader is stupid, but they're giving the user, background knowledge on the basics so that they're more empowered when they use the advanced stuff. They practice the basics in a way that's not necessarily more than what you need, but more than a superficial way, and they Stick with the basics until you're really ready for the advanced stuff. This is good didactical reduction in my opinion. First, I want to tell you what is the LaTeX Ninja blog, what are its goals. The blog, I set up the blog in 2018 and have been posting roughly once per week ever since, sometimes with summer breaks. But, well, until 2020, we've actually accumulated a good amount of posts, I guess. And, well, I'm in contact with the community, so I guess it's all working like it should. The goal of the blog was, well, in a way, to learn myself by teaching LaTeX, because I felt like I was good, I was on the path to becoming what they call a textbed, but I wasn't there just yet, and I thought if I could, become this persona, the LaTeX Ninja, who empowers other LaTeX ninjas or other LaTeX noobs, then we can learn together, and I'm still close enough to them so I can understand what potential hassles might be, and I might be able to develop curriculum and a good teaching. First of all, because I do also teach digital humanities at the university level. I have a degree in teacher's education, so I kind of know how teaching works. And I also have enough background knowledge of LaTeX so I can, give people the bigger picture. And a topic that came up really quickly, which you can also learn about in the other talk that I gave together with Astrid on the Ninja Noob Coffee Talk. I quickly encountered the problem that noobs feel that they are not so welcome, or I realized that women are often suffering from a certain, women and tech problem, that people don't trust them, that they can do things, that they shy away from things because they're constantly being told that they're not good enough or that they're not up for it. But really, anybody can learn LaTeX. It's not that complicated if you just use the basic functions. Even your grandma can learn LaTeX who doesn't even own a computer. It's true. So I just wondered, why do so many people from the humanities get discouraged from using LaTeX when it's really a skill that anybody can learn? Because after all, we have so many complicated routines in our everyday life, like getting up and brushing our teeth and making breakfast. It's actually a complicated routine, and programming in the end, or using LaTeX, is no more than a complicated routine. You just need to know, where you start, then you need to know what the next step is, and so on. And if you practice this routine enough, it's going to become automatic, and you will have mastered the skill. And anybody has this ability to master a routine and learn a skill. So why should it be different for LaTeX? So it was a big goal for me to, empower people, and especially, of course, as I'm a woman, to empower women, but also people from the humanities, because I myself come from the humanities, and I've also, in the early stages, experienced some sort of, discrimination, or why would you want to use LaTeX? Well, you don't actually need it. Then I transitioned to LaTeX, and it worked really well, and then I asked someone for help for a complicated problem, and then they said, why don't you just transition back to Word? This is kind of getting too complicated, and I don't have time to help you. Well, I decided I still wanted to learn LaTeX. I started out with doing CV templates, because I thought that it would be a good thing to, teach myself some skills. You can download the CV templates now. I'm not a graphic designer, so maybe they're not perfect, but I think some people find them useful. There are lots of resources out there to learn LaTeX, like, for example, books and tutorials. But the problem is that in order for the teaching and the didactical reduction to be really good, you essentially need, a different book for every target group, for every audience, and for every skill level. Often books are, too complicated and too detailed for a complete beginner. A complete beginner might, have enough knowledge if they look at my 3 minutes to LaTeX tutorial, because this is basically how I started LaTeX. I got this document from my then partner, who converted it to humanities citation style, and then I used it for years without ever reading up anything. I mean, maybe when there were errors, but not really actively learning it. So many posts point people to, read this L short intro, etc. But they're really not that short. They're multiple hours to read if you're not into reading technical documentation, which really isn't all that much fun to read, even when it's well written. I think many people just are not going to do it. Which is why I think we need tutorials which are really actually fit for beginners, because many tutorials are being written by very advanced users, And they think it's fit for beginners, but it's actually fit for the people, right after the beginner stage, like when you already have some knowledge, and people are not aware of this distinction. I think for the very beginning, we need short, digestible posts. Really, the shorter the better, probably, but also a few posts which explain background stuff that's going on. For example, I've tried to explain how floats work. These are things that are often missing in references, because it's kind of around there. People kind of assume that you already know how it works. They tell you how the specifics of a package work, but that somebody really explains to you why does it work the way it works. This was information that I often had to find in hours of research and reading multiple resources until I finally understood what was going on. And I think this is something that could still be supplied when teaching LaTeX, that we're still missing. Because, well, this resource will empower other people to understand other resources better, so that they're over this stage where they can read references for themselves, and it's just gonna go faster. And well, this sort of teaching is what I'd like to refer to as tacit knowledge. It's knowledge that we kind of have, but we can't really point it out. And this is the knowledge that other people lack. Yet, since it's tacit knowledge, it's also so subconscious and automated that we don't really see that other people are missing it. And I think this is something that teaching should focus on. We should, at least try to create a few resources on that. Also, maybe we might be interested in providing more materials, like I tried to make this post about how can I monetize my LaTeX skills? Because on the internet people were asking, can you make money off knowing LaTeX? And then everybody's like, no, you can't, because it's such a common skill. But then again, it really depends on what skill level you mean. I've also, since we're talking about some self-help concepts, you might know this book by Josh Kaufman. It's about how to learn anything in 20 hours. And that was really an eye-opener for me, because it just showed that with these concepts like Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, etc., people thought that expertise or learning a skill meant you had to get really proficient. Kaufman had the other example that basically, for example, when learning the guitar, you just really wanted, to know 4 chords and to be able to strum along to something. And I think in LaTeX we have both those extremes as well. Not everybody wants to become a textbook, but if you're a textbook, this skill is definitely valuable. If you're the 20-hour person, well, that might not be a skill that you can monetize, or the typical LaTeX skill that someone might acquire from having done a technical degree at a technical university, like computer science or something. I think this is probably the most common type of LaTeX knowledge that people have. Yet those people, they probably have very detailed knowledge of what they need, but they don't necessarily understand much about LaTeX, about the publishing industry or something like that. So these are also skills that are part of LaTeX that we could be teaching. Many tech people recommend you start reading references when you want to become an advanced user. And while I technically won't say that this doesn't work, I don't think this is a very sustainable way of learning the LaTeX skill. It's going to waste lots of time. I don't want to call it a waste of time, but I've spent hours and hours on some web pages searching for the information that I wanted. And had I had a structured tutorial, then all of that might have, saved me a lot of time, and I might have been able to acquire the LaTeX skill much more deliberately and quickly, and actually know that I kind of have the skill. Because also, if you're just reading references, you're so lost in the sea of details that you can't really see whether you've understood the bigger picture. So I think teaching should also focus on, what do I need to know in order to count as an advanced user?
Thank you, Zara. So I think we're now ready for some questions. Yes, start coming.
May I ask my question orally?
I think so, you can.
Yeah. Thank you first for great talk. I really enjoyed it. You're absolutely right when you say that there should be some sweet level of reduction. If I reduce it too much, it's banal and it's almost insulting. If I reduce it too little, I'm incomprehensible. But there is a problem. When I talk to people, to students or colleagues, I usually in a couple of back and forths, I can understand what they know what they don't, and go to the proper level. But my question, as a person who asked a lot of questions and has a blog, how can you quickly determine what does your reader or the person who talks with you, what is their level, and what is the proper level to talk to them? It's always something difficult for me.
I think, well, there isn't a one thing fits all solution, but I think maybe we could come up with a questionnaire of basic questions you can ask. Like, for example, if you start by asking, okay, what types of software do you normally use? Do you know anything about programming? Do you use command line things? And I think when somebody has never used anything like that, you can assume that the previous knowledge is going to be pretty low. And for example, or you could ask them, like, do you use sites like Stack Overflow? And if they're like, what Stack Overflow? For example, it's easy or it's safe to assume that they need like the introduction from the very basics. But then again, when they're like, oh yeah, I've heard about Stack Overflow, I think maybe, terms, just throwing in terms like that might help you quickly determine where they are. I mean, and I think nobody is expecting you to know straight away exactly how you need to talk to someone. I think, well, in the end, it's communication. But I think there are a few things like where you can test out how much digital literacy a person has, because often also people have incorrect self-images. I think especially nowadays, I've been working with teenagers, for example, and they think because they use smartphones all the time and apparently their parents are much more clueless or seemingly more clueless than them in using like social media, they assume that they are really, really good at computer stuff. But really, they don't even know how a website works. I was really shocked because I thought that everybody nowadays kind of knows at least, what's HTML and so on. But I think especially this new generation, they're completely delusional basically about their skills. Like they only have user skills. And I think it's probably the easiest way is to test out, how much super user skills basically someone has. Are you just like a passive consumer or not? I don't know if this answers the question. I hope so. But I think, yeah, maybe we could come up with some sort of questionnaire how you can quickly determine these things.
Thanks.
But I see there are many questions in the Q&A section, and I think also some in the chat. I'm having difficulty keeping up. I think I'm gonna start with Hoop the Bear's questions, maybe. Yeah. Hoop the Bear asks, is Overleaf the same league of ease of use as, say, Google Docs, or rather would the average user perceive it as such? Should it be, and if so, how could we ease the cognitive load and lessen perceived hurdle to get started with Overleaf LaTeX? Here, I feel that it's actually pretty easy to use because, I mean, I'm in the humanities, so I have people who are like, oh no, what's Google Docs? I don't want to use this. It's kind of scary. And well, and of course, there's a big range, but I've shown Overleaf to some students, and it was really just like let's do a 10-minute exercise. We're talking about markup. I just want you to compile a document in LaTeX, and they used it, and they had no barriers whatsoever. And I mean, they were not completely digitally illiterate, but I think it's not actually that difficult. I think just so many users are used to user interfaces and to just passively consuming technology, like I've said before, that they're just kind of shocked when all of a sudden you have some code and it's, what's that? But I think once they've gotten over that, I mean, it's easy stuff in LaTeX is easy. So I think
Okay,
Overleaf is,
thanks.
Did she bring that phone up onto the thing?
She did. When I brought her upstairs for you,
Jim, you should mute yourself.
yeah, then there's the next question. Freudenthal's concept of anti-didactical inversion for maths education might be useful to describe a lot of the educational materials on technology, including LaTeX. Experts and enthusiasts might not be the best to teach a topic they're expert of at a novice level. I'm not familiar with that concept, but like from the question, I understand that the concept basically says that experts are not the best teachers. If that's like that, yeah, I would second that, I guess. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I got it right. And then the third question is, this morning someone asked if we could teach LaTeX to teenagers. In my experience teaching HTML and programming to secondary students, it's certainly doable. The question I have is, though, should we? As a positive side effect of doing this, there would be the creation of materials suitable for truly beginners. What's my opinion on this? I think we should, because like I said, I was so shocked when I went into some teenagers tech education stuff, or when I first presented them a website, I just assumed that nowadays everybody knows how this stuff works, because I mean, they're using it all the time, so they might want to know. And I was just so shocked that the majority of them didn't, and they also didn't see why they should know these things. And I've heard this basically prediction of the future that there are not going to be social classes anymore. There's just going to be the class of basically users of technology and super users. And I think that it could be very dangerous of leading generations of students into being just users and being manipulated by, or like open for manipulation by the super users. So I think at least, it's, I mean, LaTeX isn't so complicated. It doesn't take so long to teach if you just want basic skills. So I think the more people learn to become a bit more empowered with tech stuff, the better. So I think it's definitely worth it, because after all, you have to learn Microsoft Word too. Like if you want to use some complicated functions, I mean, many people I know have been working with Word for 20 years and still don't know half of the functions it has. But if you really want to know that, you have to learn it too. And I think people do that all the time in their everyday lives, that they learn complicated skills. So why not? I think it's a good idea. Oh God, there's so many questions. Oh, wait a moment. Jonathan asks, what can we do about tech errors? What makes a good example? Yeah, that's also something I've been given thought to. I think I've started a series of short blog posts about, they were called Learning to Program, because I thought that they applied not only to LaTeX, basically the mindset when you do debugging, because I think that's when a lot of people quit, because like the program doesn't compile. What do I do now? And then they freeze, and then that's it. And I think, like, for example, with teaching teenagers, that's when you could tell whether someone is going to get good at this or someone's going to quit by how they reacted to errors. So I think this might actually be a turning point. If we do that well, we might keep many more users, because I think that's possibly scary about LaTeX. I think I've been also writing it somewhere that, well, Microsoft Word doesn't usually tell you, sorry, but we're not going to go on until you fix this thing. And I think it's a mindset issue. You just have to learn that making mistakes is okay. And what do I do step by step once it happens? So I think it's not necessarily that we need an especially good example. I just think we need basically the list of steps that I can take to find out what my problem is. Because after all, we've all probably been debugging for hours, and it can get pretty frustrating if you're at the very start and you just feel like you'll never find a solution, or you're maybe not up for it. This is maybe a moment where people quit. And I think, yeah, as long as you, at least when you have the tools that you know where can I look next, that might be a good thing. I've been thinking about this topic, and I've been trying to write some posts, but I think I also stopped at some point because I felt people were not really reading them, even though I felt them to be very important. But maybe that was just me assuming that they weren't read. At least I didn't get any comments or anything. Then Gary Gray asks, I teach it in a 12-hour course at the university. Something is happening. I basically follow the important parts of Popka and Dali via Beamer slides, what thoughts do you have on what I should be doing differently? Or what should I be doing in addition to Beamer slides? Like, what do you mean? Like, you teach them to make Beamer slides? Or like other types of documents? I was not really sure of what
No, I
this
think he means
question-
sorry, Sarah. I think he
Mhm.
means he shows an extract of Kafka and Daily in Beamer slides as a presentation.
Mm-hmm. And like what I don't really get what the question is. Like what he could be doing differently. I mean, well, it's a choice. You can always do many different things, I guess. I think there isn't one correct way of doing things. To be honest, yeah, I didn't really think about. I mean, I've been talking about creating curriculum, but I haven't really gotten around to do it because it's a difficult problem, I have to admit. So, still a work in progress. And I also don't want to say, I mean, after all, you're all in this community much longer than I have been, so I don't really want to tell anyone how to do things. Yeah, that's the answer for now. I think, oh, he wrote something else. Yeah, like he says, cannot use my mic. I teach the basics of LaTeX using slide decks. Yeah, I think, like I said, I guess it's a way of doing it, right? Then there is another question from Aman about the didactic method. That's also a question I have to say I don't exactly understand what the question is. He says, I'm not an expert in epistemology, though a quick Google search in the term didactical method contrasts it with other similar jargon from humanities and states that the method is limitations, it does not satisfy the needs and interests of all students. Is it safe that a lot of modalities in humanities is just one way that works? I have to say I don't really get what the question is. I think maybe the question is that we're assuming the didactical method is one fixed method, and then there would be other methods contrasting it. But I guess what it really refers to, I mean, like what I mean by didactics is like the whole field of didactics. So basically, there are many different approaches, and I also didn't mean to favor one particular one. It's just the thoughts that I had on it. And Mikael Sundqvist said to Gary Gray that he'd suggest to make people write documents where they have to use the stuff. But maybe he does that anyway. And then Paolo asks an easy question. What's your favorite tech editor for teaching? Overleaf, I think. That's the only one I use though. Because people don't have to set anything up, and like I only teach LaTeX specifically in classes that are not about LaTeX, so that are about XML mostly. And I'm just like, okay, we're doing annotation and markup languages, and I'm going to present LaTeX or some parts of it as a markup language just so I can sneak it in, and people have seen it once, and maybe they're motivated to write their master's thesis in LaTeX, but it's really not. I teach LaTeX mostly on my blog, so. But Overleaf is good. And then there is, I think there was still something in the chat, or does anyone still have?
There was a question comment by Peter Flynn. Sarah, if the learners don't already understand the concepts of document structure or citation reference, etc., is it the LaTeX teacher's job to teach that first?
Um, wait, say it again, please. I kind of like
If
the document class.
yes, if they don't understand the concepts like
Oh, yeah.
document structure of or how to format a bibliography or things like that, is it your role as a LaTeX teacher to teach that first and then how to do that in LaTeX?
I think I wouldn't say that there are any definite rules for what you have to do or don't, but I think it's at least I would call it an opportunity, like because often people are not really taught about these things. I was also always shocked. I never taught how you do scientific writing and research stuff, but students always come and they have no clue. And I'm kind of happy to sneak in as much as possible because I think, well, if you see it from multiple perspectives, then it sticks better. And I think I would see it as that, like that you get to do that if you have enough time for it. Wait, I'll check again. Then how many digital humanities folks use LaTeX in my experience? I was asked, none, I feel, sadly. Because, and I mean, there is a kind of understandable explanation for it, because docx is XML based, and usually things get transformed to XML anyway. So people often ask, like, make a Google Doc with very little formatting, and we convert it to XML anyway. So many people are like, yeah, well, what do we even need LaTeX for? Like, so they would definitely not write directly in LaTeX. I think some publication pipelines are in LaTeX, but often I think these things are out of the box in that part. Once you upload the XML, I think they're not actually doing anything with it anymore. And I think, you know, we have some XSLT pipelines as well, and they've had XSLFO formatting objects that will die out soon. So I think they're thinking LaTeX is becoming more relevant, but it was really a shock for me that it was very much hushed up, you know, because I think people didn't have the skill. This is probably a bit critical thing to say, but I felt many people who didn't know anything about LaTeX were really bashing it in the community. Like, yeah, who needs that anyway? We don't need LaTeX, and it can't do anything, whatever, this or that. And I just think that's because they don't know much about it. Well, either they say it's really easy, but just mentioning the markup like parts, or they're like, we don't need it. And then I talked to some guy, I made a post in LaTeX, and they were like, wow, this looks so visual. I didn't know LaTeX could do that. Like, for example, these bubble diagrams or something that are totally easy to make. So I think if we could educate people more about the fancy stuff that can really be done, that doesn't look so mathematical, because I think that might be a turnoff. That's why I think I wanted to do my CV templates where I could do some visual stuff, because math stuff is just not, it's not interesting to me. It's not relevant to me. I just don't need it. So I think the beauty for tech, many people see it in the math stuff, but when you don't need maths, it's kind of pointless. So I think it would help if we showed people more that LaTeX is much more than that, and that they're really nice out of the box solutions. I also like the stuff that I've been making for my CV templates. I've been always thinking about making the infographics package. I've been thinking about doing that for 2 years now. It has not happened so far, but maybe with some more encouragement from you guys, I will get around to doing it at some point, because I think that could really help if you could produce really fancy infographics really easily. Oh man, there's so many messages. We said the thing about the risk in using non-experts teaches that they may impart incorrect information. Yeah, that's true, but I guess that's will be solved if we provide lots of resources. Arthur also said that a strength of LaTeX is making people think about larger issues such as typography, and I also think that that could be a didactical mission that we could have, because really, honestly, I will admit, I have no idea about fonts. Fonts are so Greek to me. And I even speak Greek, but fonts, I really don't get them. And I just think that if you're an outsider to the typesetting industry or you don't work with fonts, they feel so inaccessible. Like for me personally, I would love to learn more about fonts. So, and typography. So I think this is definitely an area where we could improve. Oh God, so many answers. I feel like I'm not. Oh, Martin Sievers said that they're not projects, no projects at all in the DH, which is true. I mean, I also did my own stuff in LaTeX, obviously, but I felt that the state of LaTeX in the digital humanities was a bit dismal, in my opinion. Yeah, and I think there were lots of other comments. Teaching LaTeX as a replacement to word processes will lead to the question, why should I? I think I've also answered this in a blog post. And I think some point that people don't see is that, for example, when you're writing a PhD thesis, I mean, maybe not in the technical fields, but in the humanities, it will be printed. And this thing will have a very different layout from your version that you hand in with your advisor. So if you typeset that in Word and you put a lot of attention to the detail, and for printing, the font size has to be changed, and you want to typeset yourself, this is really complicated. Whereas in LaTeX, you just type in a different font size and you change the page margins, and that's it. So I think there are some points for it, though. If you don't actually publish your thesis, yeah, I think there are many arguments, but you'd have to come up with a list and so on. For some people, it maybe doesn't make sense, though writing very large documents is definitely nicer in LaTeX. And also a point that I see is that many people like to, like advisors, like to comment in the Word comment function or Google Docs commenting. And that's not as fun in LaTeX. So I kind of get that point. Personally, for commenting, I pandoc transform my stuff to a Google Doc and let people comment in the Google Doc. So yeah, I think the question of why should people is still unsolved. Yeah, I think that's it. I think there's no answers again, but I think overall, yeah, thanks for to everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much indeed.